Welcome everyone to our penultimate Next Practice series. We look at the next best practice in innovation entrepreneurship, and today's focus will be on how entrepreneurs leverage innovation or entrepreneurial ecosystems, so the various interdependencies between all the different actors, if it's a corporate, a startup, a university, or maybe the public sector. We're going to explore a little bit about how all of these interact and create what we might call an ecosystem. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass you on to Autio, our host, Caroline Makepeace from Public.io. We've got David Chan, a former Imperial College graduate, seasoned entrepreneur, and now entrepreneur in residence at Cylon Accelerator, just around the corner. We've got Sam Saller from EDF Blue Labs, and finally Zoe Gervier from Entrepreneur First. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Erko Autio, who's a professor at the Imperial College Business School.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome. So this session is about entrepreneurs and innovation ecosystems, and it can be a little bit confusing. Well, what is an ecosystem, and what's an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and what's an innovation ecosystem? So think about it this way. These are actually two different things, and everything changes in 2004. Well, what happens in 2004? There's a web developer conference held in Silicon Valley, and they coined the term Web 2.0. That's the social web where people can start contributing content into the web. So that signaled the beginning of the transformation that we are still actually living through, which is called digitalization. Now, it's no coincidence that in 2005, the first modern style new venture accelerator is started, the Y Combinator, again in Silicon Valley. So these two events are closely connected. You have Web 2.0, something happens in the web. So web goes through a modality change. And then that is actually driving a transformation in how you do entrepreneurship. Before, we used to teach entrepreneurship such that you have to do a business plan first. So you have to plan first in order to minimize risk. And when your plan is ready, then you start actually implementing it. Today, how we teach entrepreneurship is lean entrepreneurship. So you start by experimenting. And then you experiment, you have ideas, you test them. You usually use the web to test them. Eventually, you hone on a robust and scalable business model, and then you plan to scale it up. So it's all driven by digitalization. And think of it as, the introduction of electricity. The society and the economy were very different before electricity and after the electricity. So now we are going through a similar kind of transformation, and this time digitalization enables us to rethink how we create, deliver, and capture societal and economic value. And this is what entrepreneurial ecosystems are about. They are about facilitating business model discovery, reinventing how we actually run the society or how we run business. And the central operator in that process are accelerators. So in our panel, we have 4 kinds of accelerators. We have 4 accelerators. One is about public sector entrepreneurship. Then we have security software accelerator. We have corporation driven or connected accelerator, EDF, and then we have Entrepreneur First, which is again another type of accelerator. So we have accelerators as central operators in entrepreneurial ecosystems. So that's what this session is about. Without further ado, we have 4 great speakers here. Each of them have 7 minutes. They'll go through about what they're going to say. After that, we are going to show a video, and then we are open for discussion. That's the plan. The building here, by the way, is not really about entrepreneurial experimentation. This building is about translation of science into new businesses. So this is more conventional, more traditional science push type incubator. And I understand this building was opened last week. So it's all new. Okay, Caroline Makepeace, Public.io, welcome.
Fantastic, thanks very much. Hello everybody, it's great to be here. I'm Caroline Makepeace. I'm Chief Operating Officer at a new venture called Public. We are all about helping technology startups do business with the public sector. So we launched officially in April this year. And as a bit of by way of introduction, my background is primarily in the public sector. I was a civil servant for 6 years with the UK government. I worked in the business department, in the trade department in London and in India. But actually, I started my career at BBC Worldwide, putting the Teletubbies on stage. And our office, I think, was about 50 yards that way. So it's very exciting to be back here in a much more salubrious environment than we were working in when I first started at the BBC. So it's great to be back in that respect, but also looking to the future. And today I just want to tell you really a bit about how we at Public see the world, why we think it's important for government to be innovating by using new technologies, where we see the challenges being, and what we're doing about it, I suppose, how are we helping. So to start us off, I don't want to talk through endlessly figures about venture capital investment into European companies. I mean, this is total venture capital investment into Europe over a time period. I don't want to dwell endlessly on the figures, but the point I want to make is that growth in tech in Europe is a thing. It's real. It's not just a storm on Twitter that only the tech folk are talking about. It's real. There's money being made in tech. There are deals being done, there is huge investment, there is great investor confidence in technology right across Europe in a range of sectors. It dropped off a little bit at the end of 2016 post-Brexit, but we've really seen a resurgence despite that, despite all of the uncertainty. And on figures so far to 2017, this might be the biggest year yet for VC investment into tech across Europe. So there are lots of reasons for confidence in tech on a macro level in Europe. And within that setting, the UK is really well placed to take advantage of growth. And I mean that both for the private and the public sector. So huge growth and investment into tech companies in the UK. The UK in 2016 secured over 50% more investment than any of the rest of Europe in technology businesses. And the companies that we have here are growing too. So this is growth in turnover of UK digital businesses over time. And I think now is a good point to dwell on some of the good things that government's done to encourage the tech sector in the UK. And there have been a number of initiatives, particularly since 2010, to promote indigenous UK tech, to make UK companies more innovative, to encourage skills into the market. So great initiatives like the Enterprise Investment Scheme that essentially de-risked investing in tech for investors. A fantastic route for companies and entrepreneurs to be able to secure that initial investment to get their company off the ground. We've got the visa scheme, the Tech Nation visa scheme, to encourage high-skilled tech talent into the UK, and I imagine Zoe might have a few things to say about that later. Similarly, the Tech City initiative. I spent a bit of time at Tech City myself after leaving the civil service. And it was quite an exciting thing for government to establish. This was a real sign to the market, both in the UK and internationally, that the UK government took tech seriously and saw this as a growth potential in this market. I think so. There's some very strong steps that the UK government has taken to encourage tech as an industry. I think from where I'm standing, I think an irony perhaps is that government's been great at encouraging the private sector. Now it needs to step up and adopt some of that technology for its own purposes. So as I see it, the public sector is still a bit behind when it comes to using tech, when it comes to adopting data-led processes. It's just a bit slower on the uptake. I mean, as we all know, I think technology applications are vast, expansive, and diverse. I mean, just the phone in your pocket will organise your day. You'll get email through it. It'll tell you within a 15-minute margin of error whether or not it's going to rain. And yet, I don't see anyone really expecting the same level of service from the public sector. And that's a question mark, and that's a question for us in public that we're trying to solve. Why don't we demand more from public services? And what can public services do to live up to those expectations that the private sector has set for us? And partly, government is just a bit slow to adapt. I mean, it's slightly facetious to picture the government as yes minister, but I've been there. There are elements that are really very true to life, even today. Some elements, and there's a culture change that the public sector needs to work its way through in order to be able to take advantage of today's technology, in order to be able to make the most of data-driven decision-making processes. I mean, that is a big cultural shift for government. It is a big beast. Lots of people, lots of processes, lots of bureaucracy, a lot of the stereotypes are true. But that doesn't excuse large organisations from innovating. And arguably, with the pressures the public sector is facing over the coming years, with the uncertainty of Brexit, and some might say the opportunity of Brexit, with financial pressures, with concerns in the macroeconomic climate, the public sector really doesn't have any excuse not to be taking advantage of new technologies and finding ways of using those technologies to provide better services to citizens. So it might be a little bit slow to adapt and to adopt new technologies, but it needs to move on. And there are some pockets that are looking pretty positive. I mean, perhaps on the less facetious side of looking at the public sector, we can look at their procurement patterns. So this is spending by the UK government in 2015. So of an overall figure of £45 billion spent by government procuring products and services in a range of sectors, only 12 billion of that was going to small companies. That's an increase in where it was in previous years, but I think it's a good illustration of how much further there is to go for government to think differently about how it does business. Big government, very good at doing business with big businesses. They're both large bureaucratic organisations that can have teams dedicated to particular deals or particular relationships. But only by dealing with large companies, you miss out on a wealth of innovation that is coming up from some of these new, young, innovative companies that are the sorts that are being invested in across Europe that I was talking about earlier. But it's not all a bleak picture. The UK government particularly has done a lot to transform itself. And I'm talking primarily about the UK now because that's where we are. If you're interested in government transformation, take a look at Estonia, take a look at Singapore, take a look at Denmark as well, all doing really interesting things to adopt new ways of working, adopt new technologies. So in the UK, we have gov.uk, don't know if you've used it, but this is a single front door, essentially, for all citizens or businesses who need to engage with the government. If you want to find out anything about your rights, your responsibilities, your obligations as an employer, this is now all available through gov.uk. It's a single portal. It sounds simple, but really it revolutionised the way in which citizens engaged with the UK government. Never before had it been possible to access so much information, so much that you need to know through one spot. And notable to say that the gov.uk model has been replicated in both the US and New Zealand. So other governments are looking at things that are happening here and seeing that there's a lot to learn from. Similarly, in the spirit of bringing information sources together to make them easier to use, we've got the G-Cloud framework. So that's one framework, a set of suppliers, if you like, that gets approved by government to provide digital services to government, bringing things together, simplifying them, inviting in new companies. So lots of good things happening. We have data.gov.uk, so it's opening up data sets at the central government level, at the local government level, so opening that data for companies, for entrepreneurs, for enthusiasts to use to draw out insights, to innovate off the back of. And these are all great examples of what government is doing to invite the private sector in. And on the receiving side, if you like, what about capability within government? Traditionally, a lot of civil servants struggle to grapple with some of the opportunities that data-led processes and tech can really provide. Government Digital Service is making great strides in trying to switch that balance. It's not just that team. There are pockets of digital innovation in departments right across government. I mean central government, but also local councils. And for me, that's tremendously exciting because this shows that government really might be on the brink of taking advantage of a whole new range of innovations and technologies. And this is what is going to transform citizens' experience of the public sector. So I think for me, that's that's fantastically exciting that we've got those people on the inside, innovating from the inside. And just, I guess, to wrap up a bit, what are we doing about it? Where did public come into this mix? What are we doing to help the public sector innovate? Well, as I say, we're new. We launched officially in April this year. We are launching our first business support program next month. We're calling it GovStart. We're taking 10 companies over 6 months, and we are helping them do business with the public sector. So these are all technology companies who have some sort of technology product or service that can make public services better. We call that GovTech. It's not a phrase that we coined exactly, but apparently it doesn't matter whether or not other people have coined that phrase anymore. We can still jump into that mix. So we are launching our GovStart program, building out a series of research papers and insights about the GovTech market globally. Because what we really believe is there's something going on here. There are the companies with really exciting solutions that can deliver better services to citizens. And on the government side, there is an appetite. It might be buried under layers of bureaucracy, but there is an appetite to innovate. And there's an imperative from budgets and real-world changes around them. So I think there's something quite exciting coming down the pipe for GovTech, and we at Public are here to provide networks, support, insight and capital to those companies who are trying to transform services in order to produce better outcomes for citizens. So that's us. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, it's me. Sorry. Is this okay? Yeah. Cool. Hi, so I'm Sam from EDF Energy, and I work in actually what's called Blue Lab. First, a little bit about EDF Group. So we're actually a French company, rather EDF Energy is its subsidiary, and we've got about 38 million customers and did about just under 73 billion in revenue last year. You might know us as the nuclear power plant guys. So you've got Hinkley Point C that we're currently building at the moment. Huge investment there from the British government, the French government, us, and also the Chinese. And actually, EDF Energy itself produces a very large quantity of the country's electricity demands. But why are we interested in innovation? We're a large corporate. We do deals with government. Why do we need to innovate? You've got big government pockets. Little thing that I quite like called the Red Queen hypothesis. It's something where all companies have. You start here, you go really, really quickly, but actually you start to plateau. And we're seeing this now in the energy sector, but also other sectors where it's very, very mature. And actually, if you don't innovate, that plateau suddenly starts to become a fall. And once you start falling, it's very hard to start going back up again. So what we're doing to innovate is to actually bring that curve back up again. What can we do that's new, that's different? And to find that, we launched what's called Blue Lab. So Blue Lab sits slightly away from sort of the mothership, if you will. We're not based in a completely different area. We're not completely separate like some of the other ones that exist out there. Our model is that actually, yes, we sit within EDF Energy, but actually we're one step out, one step in. And what we do is we actually collaborate with outside companies, with startups, with other corporates. We actually then go out into the market as well. And we will test things, we will try, we will experiment. Like the professor was saying, before you write a business plan and then you do it. But now they teach you to experiment, and that's what we're doing. And it's something that is very unnatural to a corporate with all its bureaucracy and its chains of commands. And actually this is because of the huge changes that we're currently going through, and that we're seeing this is going to happen. If it's not today, it's going to be in 10 years. You've got smaller energy suppliers coming up offering cheaper rates on a per kilowatt basis, because ultimately, whether it's EDF or British Gas or OVO or anyone else, electricity is the same thing. And actually that model needs to change slightly, where actually the customer becomes the centre, and we're offering you products and services around that make your lives easier and better. We're seeing increased digitalisation. You've got the smart meter rollout coming. Every home is going to have a smart meter. How can we use that to actually do something to give you better better energy prices, more control over your usages. And actually, we're seeing things starting to come out in the market already. So you've got things like Nest, like Hive, and where we're seeing those, we're seeing actually they're causing a lot of change, and we need to be part of that change as well. So we created our platform, and loads of stuff comes in at the top, and some really key gems come out at the bottom. So we will work with external companies, external startups. We'll actually then look at our own R&D function that spans the globe and say, all right, what can we do internally? What can we do externally? What are the partnerships we can create in order to do this? And actually, Blue Lab itself has its own acceleration program. So last year, we took on 5 startups. We brought them in, we worked with them, we grew them, we nurtured them, we gave them access to things that really no startup would get because they're startups. The connections, the expertise, the data sets. And actually through those we saw a huge amount of growth they had, and we're now working with every single one of those. And by producing those startup corporate collaborations, actually we're bringing innovations to market faster. We're allowing things to grow and develop that perhaps would not have done so on their own. And actually we're now helping our customers, we're helping our market. So what does our network look like? We've obviously got our own accelerator, we work with other accelerators, and hopefully Entrepreneur First will be one of them quite soon. We work with universities, we work with other corporates. And actually we don't just look at the UK market either, we look globally, because you look at the US, you look at Australia, a lot more developed than we are in terms of energy. So let's have a look at what they're doing, let's leverage their ecosystems, let's leverage their learnings and bring that to the UK. And so we've developed sort of what we call the 4D process. It takes 100 days from start to finish, and in that 100 days, you'll have a small team who will discover whatever their challenge is. They'll design a product, and we use design-led methodology, so we're thinking of actually what does the customer want rather than what can we give you. We'll then develop the POC, which is our way of sort of saying minimal viable product, and actually we'll develop it. And we'll do all of that in 100 days. And at the end of that, we'll sit down and we'll say, all right, what did we do? Did we develop a proposition? Have we got a working prototype that we can then develop even further? This is something that's not very natural to a large corporate, where naturally things will go very, very slowly. You've got to get sign-off, you've got to get budget approvals, you've got meetings about having meetings. This really lets us sort of say, we've got an idea, let's go. Now what? Okay, let's do it again. And that really brings forward our own innovation. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Keeps us on our toes.
Sorry, that's okay.
I don't know where to stand. That's okay. Hi everyone, I'm Zoe from Entrepreneur First, and I'm the Director of Talent. So my job involves finding the individuals and the talent that come in through our programme. And as you'll come on to learn, even though Entrepreneur First is often referred to as an accelerator and an incubator type programme, we actually don't identify as one ourselves. It's taken us almost 6 years to come up with a label or a category, and I think the one we're currently talking about is company builder, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is we're slightly different to accelerators, which focus on finding great startups and then putting them through a program of support to scale them. The thing that makes us different is that we start with individuals, often before they have a team and before they have an idea, which I think sounds pretty crazy to people who don't know how the EF process works. So our mission is to build the world's most important technology companies, but the way we want to do that is by making starting a company the #1 career choice for the most ambitious people around the world. 6 years ago, EF was started by 2 people called Matt and Alice, who were former consultants at McKinsey, and they had identified the problem that for many people in the UK, at least, people weren't starting companies, even if they were the ambitious types and they knew that they wanted to go on and achieve great things. And they saw that as an ecosystem problem initially, or a geographical problem, in that if you were born in the Valley, for example, if you were born in San Francisco, that didn't appear to be the case. And so the idea of EF was born out of this idea that we could change what was the default career path and potentially build this ecosystem where actually the best, smartest, brightest minds from places like Imperial and beyond choose to start a company or choose to enter startups rather than entering more traditional career paths. So if you think about ecosystems, and if we take the example of Silicon Valley, there are many things that help you build a company, or there are many things that get you on your way. So from a talent perspective, the best talent, they're all starting companies. If you are at Stanford, it's highly likely that you're already starting a company whilst you're still studying for your degree, and maybe you're doing it with your professor or your colleague or your roommate. So it's more normal to go down the route of entrepreneurship to somewhere like in Stanford or those places. When it comes to developing an idea or building a company and forming a company in the early stages, you have a really rich network, either through work or through university or through college, a rich pool of people who also want to start companies. And so you can take time out at the side at weekends and evenings and start working away on ideas. And that is seen as very, very normal behavior for people. When it comes to scaling the company, there's lots of capital, there's lots of VCs in the US who are willing to invest in very, very high-risk early-stage startups. And there is an ecosystem of mentors who know what they're doing, and they've been there, and they've built big tech companies before, and they've exited them. So there's a really great pool of people who will help you along your way to scale you to become really big yourselves. Now, if we look at the UK, at least where it was 6 years ago when EF was started, that very much wasn't the case. So from a talent perspective, the best people, the smartest graduates from somewhere like Imperial were entering finance, or they were thinking, should I go to Bain or should I go to McKinsey, or should I go to Goldman or should I go to RBS? So the career path, or the natural career path for the best and to the brightest was not startups. And it's still not startups, but we're making progress. When it comes to developing an idea, so even for those who have taken that jump and said, actually, I don't want to go and work for a Google or a Facebook, I want to go and start a company. It's a really hard gig trying to convince all of your friends who are working in those places to quit their jobs. And I think it's fair to say that the level of risk aversion is greater in Europe than it is in somewhere like the US. And so it's really, really hard to even form a company. It's also hard to sound check your idea. There are very few people that you can go to, and you don't know what good looks like. So you don't have that sounding board that you might find in somewhere like San Francisco. And then when it comes to scaling a company, even though we're seeing more and more money being invested across Europe, we're still kind of miles behind the US, for example. And actually, we still see many of our best companies that are growing really quickly have to relocate to the US to go and raise Series A and beyond. So we believe that the ecosystem failure 6 years ago at least, was working against the best potential founders that could come out of the UK. And so EF supports those people and finds those people who we think should be building a startup and helps them to do that from scratch through the EF process. So just to give you a real life example, and actually one very close to home, of how this works, or how this has worked at EF. So the two pictures you can see here are Rob and Zihan. They were both Imperial graduates. Rob had been doing an electrical engineering degree, just coming out of his master's. He was the first engineering hire at Raspberry Pi and was considering going to a consulting firm after he graduated. And below is Zihan, who was doing a PhD in medical image computing, and he was weighing up various career options also as he was wrapping up his PhD. Even though both of them were at Imperial, they didn't know each other, but they met at EF, and they met on our third cohort. EF worked with them to try out various teams, and the idea behind how the team building process works at EF is that every 6 months we will select a cohort of 100 people who we think have significant potential to build a company, and kind of let them just build relationships and start testing teams and breaking up from teams and going through a very organic process of seeing who they might match best with. So after multiple teams, and actually Rob was well ahead of the game and had started a company and sold a company during the course of EF with someone else. They eventually ended up working together. And the idea that they stumbled across was, it turned out to be a company called Magic Pony Technology, which was solving a very hard video compression problem, which tied very nicely to the expertise and the techniques, the computer vision techniques that Zihan had been working on at Imperial. We provide a set of mentors at EF who actually work for EF, and many of them are full-time team members. And so the person you see just below in the middle is Chris Mears, who was chief scientist and part of the founding team of Metaswitch. He was their mentor during the course of the program. And so he really helped steer them towards the right path and help them avoid some of the most common pitfalls that many early stage teams make. And 6 months after that process, we helped them raise one of Europe's largest seed rounds from some really great investors. It was led by Borderton Capital, who is one of the best VCs in London. And EF was also their first investor. So throughout this process, we were funding them first as individuals, and then we made their first pre-seed investment. 18 months on, so 18 months after joining EF, Twitter caught wind of what they were doing and came along with a very attractive acquisition offer. And so they actually sold Magic Pony for a reported $150 million, and that was just 18 months after joining EF. So that is just a live example of how the EF process works from beginning to end, and how we support to develop this ecosystem that we're all trying to build. So to date, we have supported 500 people through this program. We are on our 8th cohort in London, but we opened our first international program in Singapore last year, and so we're on our 2nd cohort there. We've created 150 companies, or over 150 companies to date, and our entire portfolio is collectively worth just under $500 million. So we believe that you can start with individuals, and you can help them find ideas, you can help them form companies, and then go on to turn them into something valuable. So one of the most common questions we get asked is, but how do you get people to an idea? Do you give them an idea? And I think we wish that we had a magic bucket of ideas that we could just pluck from and give to teams, but unfortunately it's not that straightforward. One thing we talk a lot about is helping individuals stumble upon what we call a defensible idea. So coming up with a product an idea where the layer of defensibility and the moat of defensibility is one that is driven by technology. So if you can build something that no one else can build, you're automatically developing a strong armor. And the way that we do that is we talk about this idea of a person's edge. And I guess your edge is your knowledge or your skills or your experience that are unique to you in the context of other founders trying to solve problems in the same space. So for Zihan, his edge was that he had a PhD in medical image computing and had been working with some of the latest cutting edge CV techniques. But very often at EF, it's the combination of the two founders' edges that actually lead to the defensible idea. So recently we've just selected someone on the last program who had built a career and worked for many years in the French equivalent of the TfL. And he teamed up with someone who just finished a master's at Cambridge who specialised in deep learning, and they ended up building a company that focused on deep learning applied to traffic. Neither one of them would have been able to build that company on their own, but it was the combination of their edges and meeting at EF that helped them together. So this is just a mini taster of how that process works. How do you get someone from the stage where they're at, I've just about found my edge, to idea. And this is typically it looks very simple on the slide, but this is typically the process that we'll help them go through. Initially, we help them discover what is their edge, and many people would apply to EF thinking that their edge is in something completely different, and so the EF team help them refocus there. We then ask about their strong beliefs. So what are your really wild, wacky, unconventional beliefs where most people would disagree with you? So it might be something like, in the future, I believe everybody will have a unicycle that they will ride around on, or something like that. And then, what is your hunch? Your hunch is, how will that materialize or come to reality? What form do you see that existing in? And then the last point is, how can you test this? And that is all about what is the minimum viable thing that you can do to prove that there might be some demand for this. And so I think someone mentioned earlier, back gone are the days where you have to have a very complicated business plan before you start a company. We encourage all of the founders that join us to go out of the door straight away and start speaking to people. And very often this testing stage is just speaking to a lot of people. So this is how the EF process works, and I think to the point that everybody's been making earlier, we genuinely believe that the UK is making lots of great steps towards being a really, really great place to build big companies, and we hope that EF is contributing to that ecosystem at a rapid rate.
Thank you. David, now you get to talk.
Hello, my name's David. I did electronic engineering here at Imperial, and the reason I did that was I was interested in synthesizers, so I wanted to go into the music industry. I actually never made it because the first summer I was working in a broker in the city, and I wrote. I was trying to do something via a spreadsheet. It's a complex algorithm, and in the end, I just wrote a program. And at the end of the summer, he said, you know, everyone in the city wants this. Why don't you set up a company? We'll give you the IP. Off you go. So that's how I fell into startups. Overall, I'm on my 5th startup. Very quickly. So second one was we were acquired after a couple of years by a Silicon Valley company. I ended up going over there. Was there for 7 years. The 4th one is an interesting one. So this was 10 years ago. So this is where we decided that given the internet and all the tools available, we can live anywhere we like. Okay, so I decided to go and live in Ayia Napa in Cyprus. And I lived there for 5 years. There's another slide that explains what happened, but just bear that in mind. And then I'm currently on my 5th startup. I'm also the entrepreneur in residence at Cylon Accelerator, which is a cybersecurity accelerator. And the reason I ended up there was that when I started my 5th company, I applied to Cylon, and they invited me in for an interview, which was a surprise. And they said, well, you're only a month old, so no, you can't join us, but why don't you come in and help? So I said, okay. Okay, so back to Cyprus. So 10 years ago, we were embracing living remotely. We could live anywhere we like. We could use the internet to use Skype. We had all the services available. So off we went to Cyprus. Now, the great thing about that is, you know, for the first few months it was great. But eventually, even the people that were really close to me, because this company was actually the same founders as my 2nd startup. And over time, we just gradually drifted apart, even though we were best friends. Because Skype is just, you know, you can't have a beer and talk to someone over Skype. It just doesn't feel right, you know. So, and no, we didn't try that. So it's really hard to actually connect with people. And we even had people involved in the company that I spoke to every week. And after the 5 years, I felt, actually, I don't know them. You know, I've never had lunch with them. Actually, I have, but it was just one lunch, you know, every 3 months. It's not enough time to get to know somebody. And when you're working with people all the time, you need that connection. You need that downtime, whether it's after work or at lunchtime, where you can talk about other things. You can have a beer or a meal. And so over time, what happens is that you gradually use Skype less and less. You use it for formal meetings only, and you just lose that connection. And it was a real shame, because we wanted to make the concept work, but unfortunately it didn't. So next I'm going to talk about accelerators. So these are, I categorize accelerators into 2 types. There's the mainstream, we have Entrepreneur First, and then all the other well-known ones. And then more recently you have more sector-focused ones to do with specific areas of whether it's in terms of technology or in terms of a business sector. And the all of them do roughly a 3-month program where you have a lot of mentors. My role as entrepreneur in residence is actually very different. So I tend to advise them on long-term things. What's your life going to be like in a year's time, in 2 years' time? You know, how do you prepare yourself for all the changes you're about to go through? So it's not about how to do the marketing or how to do this or that or the other. It's not about the functional, because we have a lot of other mentors who are way better than me at that. So for most of the mentoring I do, it's about laying the groundwork to help them be a success. I told them to, you know, in a year's time you'll need to do this, so why don't you go and read this book now and let it sink in, and just things like that. So there is something else though. Chris mentioned Meetup and Eventbrite. So I actually live in Leicester, so I come down to London for 2 days. I stay in Airbnb for 2 nights a week, and during those evenings I always go to a meetup. I find a technology one and a business one. It could be any business, things that I know nothing about. But increasingly I'm bumping into people who are also doing the same, and that was the thing that was that's really missing. It's fine to have accelerators and ecosystems like that, but you need that networking. And unfortunately, you have to use up your evenings to do that. I don't know the solution to that, but certainly when I was in Silicon Valley, you did a lot of networking after work. And this sort of replaces that. And it's really useful. As an entrepreneur, I find these sessions way more useful. And don't try and just stick to one type. Just broaden your horizon, and you just learn so much. So the other thing I was going to add is that whenever I go to these meetups, I hardly ever meet any students. Okay, so it's business people and not many students. The one where there are both students and people from business is actually an Imperial, and it's the Ethereum. It's a blockchain meetup, and that's the only one where you get both types of audience. And I think that's important, because without that sort of grouping or that networking between students and people out in your work, it just doesn't work as well. So one of the things I was going to suggest was that maybe the university should open up its rooms and say, if any meetups want to use the facilities at university, please do so. Because right now we use Google Campus, we use lots of other facilities in the city. And if, so the Ethereum meetup is at the South Ken campus, and that's the only occasion where students turn up. If it's far away in the city, they don't bother. So that's the only suggestion I have. I think that's it. Thank you.
Just before we open up to the Q&A, we're going to show a very brief video, and as usual we use Mentimeter, so to create a bit of interaction, just to vote on the subject of tonight's debate to some extent, which I'll also put on the screen in a second. So bear with me, I'll just set up the video. In the meantime, if there's any quick questions, it might be worth just asking one.
Well, only because it directly relates to what David has just said. So yes, I identified that the ecosystem needed joining the dots actually, and actually it was inspired by Imperial, because I'd done a lot in East London, and then I started to do a lot over here in Imperial. So we run Deep Tech Funding Forum about a month ago here, and so I realised the ecosystem was all changing, and the centre was going to be somewhere else, and I also identified there was going to be a need for a kind of Silicon Valley style mixer where you had universities so universities, startups, corporates, and government or whatever. So I created a mixer down below DeepMind, which is in King's Cross, called Deep Tech Mondays, and that is basically just to do exactly what you say, to bring in people together and bring in people who wouldn't normally come together.
And do students attend?
Yes, I've got a bit of everything really. Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm trying to encourage PhDs, MScs, people like that, because it is deep tech. So I don't want the normal East London drinking crowd, basically. for which I have plenty of other events that they can come to whenever they like.
So for every next practice, we introduce one of our entrepreneurs in residence. What's unique about Imperial College, maybe not particularly unique compared to other large universities, but we do have a very global student body and a very, very global alumni community. So our entrepreneurs in residence tend to take a very global flavour. We've had an introduction to John Ryan in the West Coast in the previous time we were here. We had Beth Marcus, who was on our first panel, who's from Boston and now with Amazon Robotics. And we've had Tim Davey on the previous session on data-driven entrepreneurship from One Fine Today. And this evening we have Eddie Chow giving a quick insight into what the entrepreneurial ecosystem looks like in Singapore. It's actually about 3 a.m. in Singapore, so we did an FT-style interview with Eddie. So we're going to just give 5 minutes insight into how he sees the entrepreneurial ecosystem developing over there and how things might be a little bit different.
Well, first of all, thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak to our friends in Imperial College, and the greetings from Singapore, the very hot Singapore. Regarding the Singapore entrepreneur ecosystems, if you look at that, say, 20 years ago and before, Singapore actually highly depending on the being a hub for a lot of things like including trading, shipping, aviation, banking, finance. So the people in general, they're being trained actually to do support work. I mean, to support a multinational company, they have a regional headquarters in Singapore. So that is, they have been doing very well. It's very similar to probably to Hong Kong. We don't have natural resources. So we're highly depending on a lot of multinational companies establish their headquarters in Singapore, and then so we start the business. So of course, about 15 years ago, Singapore government start to realize that they especially during the 1997 when the Asian financial crisis started, they realized that even the multinational firm actually will pull out from Singapore because the business is just not there. And it highly impact our economy, and we start to realize that it is important to push to a more knowledge-based economy rather than a support-based economy. So they start to establish some platform systems actually for entrepreneurs to start. It's a painful experience, to be honest. They learn from other countries. Of course, everybody wants to learn from Silicon Valley, but you can't replicate the Silicon Valley in Singapore, overnight. So it took them quite a number of years. Fast forward, in the last 10 years, they start to realize that, apart from building, nice technology park and all this, that is the hardware. The software is much more important. Meaning that they need to build support ecosystems. For example, accelerator, incubator, seed investor, Series A investor, Series B investor. So I have a chance actually to participate in some of the panel to on behalf of the government to invest in those venture capital company actually and make sure that whatever they invest will be in Singapore and in specific sectors, so that the startup get the jump start from there. So it's a long journey. It is still moving on and evolving.
And Eddie, when we came to visit you in January in Singapore, we met you just by the Singapore A-Star sort of region, and there seemed to be a very flourishing sort of entrepreneurial space or ecosystem. I think was it Block 17? They had various.
71. My office, my fund is in Block 71. My two startup in Block 79. Remember?
Yes, that's right.
Old industrial building.
That's it. It's a really exciting space, and I was just wondering, from that sort of vantage point, how have you seen entrepreneurs that you've worked with in Singapore leveraging those kinds of resources and those capabilities?
Okay. Interestingly, you look at the block 71, 79, 73, now they're 77, 81, The one block I'm in, it is more than 30 years old industrial building. They're about to pull it down 5 years ago or 7 years ago. And it is, and this is a big, beautiful piece of land, And the government decided that, okay, why don't we just rent it out to some startup, no thrill, it's basically it's empty space. It's cheap. You go and sort of do whatever you like for a certain period of time. And we are just opposite, A-Star, for example, the 7 research institutes under the government. They have beautiful building. And that's how it started. The whole entire Singapore ecosystem, in a big way, it started in Block 71. And then the first couple of years, it started to attract some startup going there. Initially, it is not doing well, but after a couple of years, actually, it is the VC went there. There's a lot of activity. Then, a few hundred startups just spontaneously, descended there and start their life there. And that's how we started. A lot of people saying that it's like a mini Silicon Valley in Singapore. It is true, because within such a short distance, small space, now we have a few hundred startups, and a lot of VC, range from seed investor to a late stage investor. They also have an office there. So, and a lot of incubators, accelerator, even the banks, they also established a presence there, because they realized that, instead of asking the startup to go to their, beautiful office in the CBD area, they come to you. Mm-hmm. So it shows that, they look at, this kind of innovation and disruption. They need to get close to that.
Mm. And on that point about proximity, the title of this next practice event is about the death of distance, and whether or not that is indeed the case. I'd be curious to get your perspective on how important it is to have this level of proximity, either to a global market or a regional market, or your suppliers and customers. To what extent can Singapore create a global connection via that ecosystem?
Well, Singapore, it's if you look at it, it's Singapore-wide. There's so many MNC, multinational company, whether there's a manufacturer, pharmaceutical, banks, and all that, they like to set up a regional headquarter, or some actually even global headquarter. Actually, it's in Singapore. The reason actually is infrastructure is fantastic. Even though the expatriate, they come here, they feel at home because, it's just highly efficient. I was born in Hong Kong. I came to Singapore about 20-something years ago. And when I look at it, it may not be the perfect environment for everything, but if you are a professional, an expatriate, you want to set up something, it's talking about sort of like days. You can start a company actually within an hour, literally. And the other thing is about the IP protection. A lot of startups, even though they want to venture into India, Indonesia, Malaysia, or this region, they still want to have a headquarter located in Singapore. There's several reasons. Actually, it is the VC want it, because the VC know about this. This is a common law. They follow common law. It's like England. And at the same time, there's a very, very strong protection of intellectual property. So when they cut a check actually to a company, they know that what can they expect. So that is extremely important for investor. Itself, the market, Singapore as the market for consumer, it is only about 5-point-something million people, nothing to shout. If you talk about corporate customer, the enterprise market, there's a plus point. For example, you hit a bank, if the regional headquarters actually is in Singapore, that means you can close probably 10 countries in one shot. So that is the beautiful part of being in Singapore. But having said that, it doesn't mean that, you come to Singapore, you establish your headquarters, that's it. You probably still need to sort of venture into step by step. Singapore is a springboard for you to sort of establish whether it's a headquarter, regional headquarters. So from there, actually, you venture into different markets.
Interesting. So it's a springboard into Asia, effectively, but also having global relevance. Well, Eddie, thank you very much for your time.
I'd like to now pass back onto the panel and up to the Q&A.
Okay, let me just recap. So we have this disruption that is going through society, and it's visible everywhere. It's visible in Singapore, it's in sub-Saharan Africa, everywhere. And it's affecting everything. And with digitalization, with internet, we can rethink how we create, deliver, and capture value. And this is job for entrepreneurs. And this is opening up huge opportunities. Some sectors are already affected, think media, maybe advertising. Some sectors are starting to feel it, think fintech. Some sectors are waking up to it. We have even government, recognizing that they can actually rethink what they do. And we have EDF, because of IoT and other things, trying to be proactive about this disruption. So entrepreneurs are at the vanguard. There are huge opportunities, and then we have accelerators that facilitate this process. Either it can be in specific sectors, it can be with the government, or it can be more generic as EF is doing. So that's the context. And then the question is, how can entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs take advantage and leverage these ecosystems to start their businesses? So this is what I suggest you should think about. How can you take advantage of people like this? That's the essence of it. So you had a question to EF. What kind of talent are you looking for?
I think the funding, how do we fund
I
it?
was asking for details on how they invest in the 100 talent that they choose over 6 months. So if they come up with an idea, for example, and it starts with a company that they have, a team that they found, how does EF capture value out of this? What type of equity do they take, for example? What type of proposals do they have or provisions?
Yeah. So the first 3 months of the EF programme are what we call the fellowship. And the fellowship is designed to be a grant almost to, or a stipend to any individual that we select, which gives them 3 months to explore co-founding relationships and ideation. And if at the end of those 3 months they don't have a company, they have no obligation to pay that back, so it's just a grant. So that is designed, the reason why we structure it like that is we want to try and remove as much of the risk involved in starting a company as possible for the people who should be starting companies. And I think one of the daunting things for people at a later stage in their career is, well, I have a mortgage to pay or I have a family to support. And so that is designed to pay their salary essentially across 3 months. So that currently is just under £4,000 for the first 12 weeks. As you're going through, as soon as you're in a team that has some promise, EF, as I mentioned earlier, will become your first investor. And so first we invest £10,000, and then we will invest again £70,000 near the end of the 6 months. And if you get to that stage, by us making that investment into you, what we're basically agreeing to is that we will continue to be an investor in all of your future rounds if you want that. So we kind of back you for life if we've got you to that stage. In return, EF gets a percentage of the company, so that's 8% of the company. And for that 8%, I guess, it's hard to compare on paper that deal versus another accelerator, because I'd say the most valuable thing people get out of EF is meeting the co-founder and developing an idea, which you can't really put a price on, I guess.
Yeah, this is, by the way, this is an important function of accelerators. There are lots of entrepreneurs there, and they share their experiences as they experiment with these business models. You had a question?
Yes. Thank you. Very interesting talk. And according to Professor David Gunn, Vice President of Imperial, The main problem that we have with the startups now is scalability. He wrote an article last month for the World Economic Forum. So my question is, what accelerators are doing beyond mentoring? What strategy are they taking to help with this issue, which is the scalability of startups?
So strategy for scalability.
Yes.
And
Sorry,
what can you do?
Can you explain that? Scalability has
beyond
many
mentoring, because normally accelerators are offering programs to assess the scalability based on mentoring. But beyond mentoring, because basically everyone is doing that, what accelerators are doing beyond? What is the strategy? Some new methodology, some new approach.
How do you scale up, and what can you do to help scaling up? I think this is a question to David. Well, we all heard of entrepreneurs in residence. Well, what do entrepreneurs in residence actually do? And how do you help the venture to scale?
Yeah, so the reason I asked that question is that I'm just trying to work out what angle you're going there. So I tend to mentor them exactly on those issues, what happens afterwards. So I spend most of we have a 3-month program. I spend most of the time looking at the period after the accelerator. I don't necessarily prescribe anything. It's because it's down to, you get to know them, and you get to know what their values are, basically. And then based on the values of the founders, you then work out, well, this is how you could go forward. But essentially, I mean, I still, even when they leave Sign-On, I still talk to them after that. They ring me up all the time. But I never prescribe anything. I always say, well, these are the options. In a lot of cases, actually, it's I have to tell them that they have to do the work. You need to do this. And typically, like, for example, a lot of startups will say, well, I'll develop the product and then I'll hire a salesperson. Well, that doesn't work. You develop the product and then you go out and sell yourself. And then once you've built a repeatable sales model, then you hire salespeople. So it's a lot of things that further down the line they'll meet those challenges, and it's preparing them for that. Really. So I don't know if that answers your question on scalability.
And luck plays a big part, but then if you hit the sweet spot, it can work out really nicely. My most successful students, they started the business in 2011. Then during their first year, they turned over 200,000 euro. Last year they made, and this is revenue, 2 billion with a headcount of 136, and they sold themselves to Tencent for 10 billion. That you can do if you are in digital business. This was mobile gaming, Supercell. You had a...
Well, I just wanted to say though that it's not normally the role of an accelerator to scale startups. I mean, most accelerators are really taking startups to product market fit and take them to VCs, and VCs are putting money in to scale them. So, I think if a startup was scaling, they would be advising to prematurely scale, and it would be the wrong thing to do. The exception might be EDF, where a corporate gets involved, and maybe you can open up some channels or something like that to startups, and maybe you should be helping them to scale. But apart from that, I think maybe it's the wrong thing for accelerators to be doing in the first place.
So can the EDF help scale? Can you provide some support?
We can do, simply because of our size and our network. So some of the startups will be more mature. So one of the startups we just had in our first cohort through our accelerator has already sold 400,000 units of its product. So that's not a typical early stage seed by any means. But actually what we can provide is, we can sit you in front of people who've been in the energy industry all their lives. We can give you access to nearly 40 million customers through EDF Group. We can give you access to government contacts, regulatory knowledge, even just little things like the legals behind the energy industry that a startup or a scale-up probably wouldn't naturally know unless there was someone very specific in there. So that's what we can do, and perhaps we're, as you say, we're more appropriate for a scale-up. But even so, I think even we tend to be more on the startup level of things.
How about the UK government? I mean, if someone comes to you and say that, well, I would like a slice of that 12 billion market, thank you very much. What can you do?
Well, that's why we're here. I mean, we try to help on a number of levels, and we're a slightly unusual setup. Again, we don't really identify as an accelerator. We work with companies from a real spectrum of size, right from very, very small early stage teams who are just raising their seed round. We've got a Series B company similarly that's in our shortlist for our first cohort. And I mean, yes, there's general business mentoring from entrepreneurs who've been there and done it, but we want to focus much more on the idiosyncratic challenges of selling into the public sector. So we're working with mentors who have sold into the public sector on behalf of some of the major tech companies or have run digital transformation projects within the government. And on the sort of the scalability question, I mean, government has vast opportunity as a market. And the central government, yes, there are also local councils, and we have somebody who is helping companies get into those opportunities. We're also building strategic partnerships with the likes of Estonia, Canada, Denmark to help companies scale internationally, because if they're going to grow big, they need to be looking internationally in the long run. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you. We have two questions, one here, and then you are number 3. So please.
This might be a bit unfair, but I felt that we started by you saying, just do it. And we continued by you saying, you've got to open yourselves to the chance thing of meeting people, getting ideas, and so on. By just going out there, you've got to know what you're doing and what you're going to get out of what you're doing. And that, in a sense, I'm glad EDF mentioned design, is the design process. When you talked about experimenting, planning, and scaling up, these are all design processes. And behind that, there is extreme discipline. And it's not just the customer orientation, but it's actually looking at a challenge holistically, such that everything is integrated, and when it's implemented, it operates seamlessly. And that's a hell of a thing. Now, I didn't get the impression, and I wonder whether you could expand on that, of how you instill in people. It is what you put together and how you put it together, and then how you make it happen, which are all design processes. And that includes the people that you bring together.
I think from EF's perspective, that having those skills or that experience is something that we look for in the screening process. So one thing I didn't mention is that there's a heavy vetting process to get into EF, and so we look for things like do they have design thinking skills? Have they built products before? I think our initial focus in the short term, at least in the first 90 days of a company's life, is just ensuring that the teams are working on something and building something that people actually want. And the number one reason that teams fail at EF is because they go down a path for too long working on something that actually nobody really wants. It might be a nice to have, but people aren't going to chuck money at you. And so I think at the very early stage that we work at, that's our main focus, just build something people want. But making sure that you have the talent in the team who can actually, once you get some wheels moving, be able to put together that process. I think is really important.
One of the biggest stumbling blocks for entrepreneurs is falling in love with their own product. So you really have to learn how to listen, and you need discipline in that. So that is a very, very...
It's knowing what you want when you go out and talk to people.
Yeah.
So I can add some detail to that. So as an engineer, process is very easy to live with. So, and that's one of the things I tend to teach most of the entrepreneurs that I see, is that a lot of the functional areas are processes. Sales isn't an art; it's a science. And I have to admit that my first really big experience of that was when I moved to Silicon Valley. We basically did a startup inside a company, because I just saw how they did things, and they're just meticulous. The planning, the way they think about things, it's very meticulous. And yes, it's all process driven. But you know, when I turned up there, it wasn't okay. We were doing a startup. It wasn't a case of, you know, how much revenue do you think you can do this year? It was, what do we have to do to get 10 million this year? So you basically, it's all a process. And
I think just to jump in there and perhaps be a bit of a devil's advocate. So I actually started life as a medical student, so I would have been a doctor if I'd gone down that particular path. I ended up in the energy industry, and for me it was starting my own company with my housemates, and we would just do it. We had, you know, I was a medical student, one of them was a physics graduate, and the other one was an economics graduate. And then we found a computer science guy who was bored one summer. So we didn't have any of that process driven, we just had an idea and we just did it. So I think there are merits to both. But I think that there is something about just doing it and the learning process through that I think if you do create too rigid a process that's perhaps too clinical, like you saw in that company, you take out the learning opportunities, you take out the mistakes. And actually the mistakes and the learning opportunities are what build great companies, I think, rather than just that this is your path, follow it. But if I'm just doing this, I don't see anything else to my left and right.
I would argue that the actual failing and making mistakes and learning is part of that process.
Of course.
So even though it's a process, part of that is learning, making mistakes, and being able to cope with that.
And that is actually a skill that you can learn, and this is where accelerators can help. Did you have a brief question?
Yes.
Exactly on this?
It was really brief.
Okay, then we have one question there and one here.
So where are the failures then? Because there are successful people here. But wouldn't it be good to have the failures? Because I think there's, slightly longer segment, but there seems to be, when you're talking to younger people in particular, you could be an entrepreneur, you're going to be successful. Actually, 90% of them are going to fail. I don't know what the figures are. You're weeding people out, entrepreneurs first, and there's various other weeding mechanisms as well. Is it a bad thing to be saying to people, you're all going to succeed, yeah? Because that seems to be some of the things I'm picking up in the meetups that some of the ones that Debbie goes to, yeah? Where there are students. So where are the failures, and if you learn a lot from those?
So it's not so much failing, it's learning, constant learning. And so if you have an idea and you try and get feedback on it and no one's interested, well, is that a failure? No, you either tweak the idea or you drop it. But failing fast is important.
There are good failures and there are bad failures, so the things to avoid the bad ones. Please.
I was going to ask a different question, which I will do, but I'll just comment on the failure thing. I think words matter, and using the word failure is a kind of dramatic way of describing what David was talking about, which is you take wrong turns, you're flexible enough to understand that, you move on. So it's not failure really, it's learning how to progress. It's a rather different thing. I think we overplay the failure.
But just to respond to that, if you're a commercial enterprise and you waste $10 million from a mistake, they call it a failure, like to your face, your bosses.
In an accelerator,
he doesn't talk about
mistake.
Yeah, I know, but it's that, that's the
kind of the trick is.
That's the problem with corporates. That's why they don't innovate, because they're afraid of losing their jobs. So it's really a problem in corporate life.
Yeah, well,
not an advantage.
Which is a similar government situation,
exactly the
of
same
course.
problem.
They're classically risk averse, and there's an element about it's not necessarily just failing per se. It's failing smartly, failing quickly, which comes back to again the whole design process. The idea of starting with user needs, starting small, iterating from there, and building. And the idea, still a theory, there are always still mistakes, but the idea is if you start small from user needs and build up from there, you should be able to avoid some of those kind of big ticket failures, if you like, and that it's more about pivoting than it is about failing. But sorry, that wasn't your question, was it? You had another.
That was my own fault. I shouldn't have responded. I should have just made the question. But my question was kind of it's to do with the issues about scaling and actually the comment about accelerators not really having a role of trying to scale businesses, which is strictly true and accurate. It leads me to ask a question about ecosystem, because accelerators are incredibly important to innovation ecosystems. It's well known that when they're there, they make the place buzz, but they're not independent of the ecosystem. And in other words, in the most extreme version, you'd have an accelerator without any financial ecosystem around it, and that would be dead. I mean, it wouldn't be able to exist at all. So the question I wanted to ask all of you was very parochial. It's about London, and you can compare it to Silicon Valley if you like, but it's about London. And what is the problem that London has at the moment? Because I work in this area, and I would say the ecosystem isn't perfect yet, by any stretch of the imagination. You haven't talked about finance. I would point my finger at the risk capital finance community in London and say, this is just culturally not right yet. Certainly not like Silicon Valley, certainly not engaged in risk taking at the level that America is. And in the area that I'm interested in, certainly not very patient with the capital that it invests, certainly not in the way that California is as well. So I would say there's something missing in London. Do you think that's right, or do you think there's anything else that's missing in London in the ecosystem?
I think from my experience working at EF, one of the problems I've noticed is that almost the stage before even having the conversation from corporate to startup, it's not knowing how to engage, and I think we all know that lots of large corporates now have massive innovation budgets, but there seems to me to be a lack of knowledge on how to spend those effectively. So we've seen this rapid rise in, no offense to EDF, rapid rise in in-house accelerators or corporate accelerators or incubation programs. And some of them are better than others, but in my mind, it might be a better use of that resource and that cash to find other ways to engage with startups that are coming out of already existing institutions or accelerators, and find different ways of engaging. One way we're trying to tackle this at EF is we have a commercial team in-house whose role is to essentially build partnerships with CXOs across many different industries and verticals, and actually bring them to EF and the co-working space in the HQ and get them to meet first-hand startups and see and touch the technology that they're working on. And we find that encourages a conversation, and then the commercial team who are experienced in business development and navigating those corporate structures can help our startups sell their technology into those corporates, and at the same time do the education piece that's needed on the other side.
So, finance, that was about finance, but how about you others? Do you agree? I mean, some people say that there's a little bit of a paradox that London is, the global center of finance, but actually new venture finance is, that there might be a gap there. Do you agree? Do you see that?
I think that in terms of really early stage money, London is, or the UK is the best place, because of the Enterprise Investment Scheme, SEIS and EIS. Startups from all over the world come to the UK first, purely because no other country has this scheme. And the problem is then after your 150k, then the money dries up. And the problem then is basically because the investors don't have a history of investing in these types of technologies, and it will just take time. I think that over each year it's getting better and better, but it just takes time.
It's certainly a cultural issue. I think it's not a case of we don't like startups here as much. It's a cultural thing. When I was running my startup, we were told, what are you going to do in 6 months? What are you going to do in 12 months? What are you going to do in 3 years? And if we hadn't hit those numbers, then they weren't very happy with us. And there wasn't more around, okay, well, why? How can you make it better? How can we pivot? What do you need? It was, why didn't you? Why did you fail? Why didn't you hit this? So perhaps there is a bit of a culture change needed. But I think certainly with what David sort of said around EIS.
I mean, I've also found a great sort of many of those who have in the past invested have been very arm's length in a way that doesn't happen in California, where there's much greater engagement and interest in what the business is doing.
I think
sort of I'm laying my bets, I'm just going to see what happens attitude, rather than I think you might make it and I want to help you.
Yeah, and some of this is we in the UK are a bit further behind the curve, and the US has been at it for a long period of time. They're a more mature market, and I think the Valley is an aspirational benchmark, but it's a little bit unfair to think that we could be at that stage already. I mean, a lot of it's about maturity of the investors, maturity of the market, enough good case studies, if you like, to build the case for investors to raise their confidence, which is part of what we want to do with GovTech companies, to shine a light on the fact that there is growth potential, therefore investors should be taking the leap, not just at a seed stage, but also when it comes to scaling up. And if you compare, I mean, we're broadly optimistic about the investment sort of scenario in the UK at the moment, particularly in London. I mean, if you compare London to other European cities, the amount of venture capital flowing is so much greater. So, I mean, yes, we need to be looking to the West Coast and aiming for that, but as you say, it's going to take time. We started from behind, and it's not going to happen overnight.
One final comment on that, I think.
Because the 19th century we fueled the so it's a very interesting thing. We lost our mojo somewhere along the way. We did have the intent of doing big things before.
I think one important question that I've been thinking about a lot is how do we, a really important part of us building this ecosystem that can rival the Valley is keeping talent here and keeping the companies that can be the next Googles in London or in the UK or in Europe in general. And so we are seeing that you get to a certain stage in the UK and you have to go out to California to raise that next set round of money and go to that next stage of growth. And I think it's going to be really important for us, if we want to get to that scale, to keep talent here and keep US acquisitions at bay.
Okay. Chris, did you want to say something about Menti? So we have about 10 minutes left now.
Yes, if you do have your smartphones, here's a good excuse to sort of check emails, but also to log into Menti and vote on the motion, and you'll see a question that we're curious to get your feedback on. The results will be posted on our Twitter page later, and also hopefully shown at the end of the event. So you have 10 minutes now, just take some time to log in and vote on the motion.
And then you'll get to see the results in 10 minutes. You had a question, you have been waiting.
I just want to ask a really left field question, because after getting my MBA from Imperial, I actually became a theatre director, and now I work as a photographer and run an Instagram hub on the side. Someone asked me this question, I was actually quite staggered, but now I've got a few more answers. What is the role of photography in a hyper-connected world? So whilst waiting for my turn to ask a question, I actually thought, well, from the supermarket aisle, I see husbands and wives trying to get these meal deals, £10. They ring their spouse out, what do you like? Now you can actually just take images and WhatsApp, and then they can pick and choose. Also, just imagine if you take all images out from our social media. So suddenly Facebook's got no photographs, YouTube shut down, Twitter's got no photographs, Instagram just collapsed. It's unthinkable. But on a kind of more macro level, with only a week on to the general election, all I hear on Radio 4 is nothing's going to change, they're all the same. It's really depressing. Brexit. This is a really diverse platform. Here we're talking about innovations, it's really kind of thinking, doing outside the box. I'm too close to making images because I work in it. What do you think of the future of photography in our brave new world? To get a mojo back.
Future of photography, so that's a...
It's an interesting question. I think I come from art history background, so I'm just trying to think back to the debates I've had around visual culture and the future of it. I think a really important shift in behaviour will be bringing search technology to images. So if we can develop the technology that allows us to search for a bunch of images as easily as we can search the web and index the web, then I think that will create a whole set of new behaviours and a whole set of new ways to communicate. So for example, I feel like I'm already replacing my traditional search for restaurants and venues with Instagram, and I actually want to see what it's like before I go, so I find myself searching Instagram hashtags rather than going to Google and searching TripAdvisor or something like that. So I think we'll see a new wave of behaviours if and when technology gets there, and I know there are lots of interesting startups that are tackling the problem of categorisation in image search, like IM in Berlin and others.
And there's obviously, with AI, we are going to get a lot more opportunities that I cannot even think about, but there will be.
I think there's some really interesting questions for art generally. I mean, with the ubiquity of photography, everyone can take photos on their phone, and as you say, it's searching Instagram for restaurant recommendations, and it's become such a universal activity. They're all photographers now. I think that's a really interesting question. So what does that mean for art photography? Where's the line, wherever the line, I suppose, between social media photography and art? And I have no idea what the question is, or what the question, how to answer that question. But it's presumably it's quite an exciting time for the photography industry, I'd have thought, but also perhaps. Is there a feeling of being under threat? I mean, particularly kind of think of current affairs situations. Don't need a professional photographer to be on scene to capture the moment of drama anymore, because there'll be a bystander and they've captured it very nicely. Thanks very much. The camera on their phone is better than a photographer's lens might have been 10 years ago. So I suppose, does that make us all artists, or does that mean that we as a society are going to hit a point where we need to rethink the value of art, rather like we rethought the value of coffee and went back to a real sense of artisanal coffee? Is photography waiting for that moment where we need to reevaluate how much we value it?
Okay, we have time perhaps one or two questions. There's one hand here. You haven't asked anything. You haven't asked. You first, you second.
Okay, thanks. My question is, how do you go about promoting an innovation ecosystem within an area where there isn't necessarily an immediate financial, like a lucrative financial outcome of having such an ecosystem? So what I mean by that is, I used to organize meetups for medical informatics. So I worked for a big pharma company, and lots of people wanted to work for that pharma company, so people came to my meetups. And we started to organize meetups for machine learning. For all these reasons, people started coming. I'm trying to work within the operating theater and trying to kind of revolutionize the way people apply technologies, new technologies to that. And nobody comes to my meetups, because I'm hoping to get people, or medical students, I'm hoping to get people to learn augmented reality, robotics, and this kind of stuff. But really nobody wants to start a business selling robotics to the NHS.
You'd be surprised.
But there are 3 companies that are kind of trying to do it, maybe more up and coming. But really, at least from my perspective, less popular. So do you have any input on that? How do you kind of create that interest in an ecosystem and hopefully start to form around?
How do you build momentum in ecosystems? And if you have a platform, how do you build momentum around platform? It's a huge question in the ecosystem space. Any thoughts on that?
I think you should just carry on doing it, because there's lots of examples where people effectively do things as a hobby because they like it, and then eventually it takes off. But you have to keep on trying different angles to that. So I would say don't give up. I mean, it's basically you haven't found a business model. So keep on looking.
Usually what you see is there's a point beyond which it just starts feeding itself. The trick is getting to that point.
And I think two things really. One on are there interesting, innovative digital tech companies that want to revolutionise the health service? I mean, definitely yes, and NHS Digital, amongst others, are doing lots of good stuff to encourage that and buy those products in, and we ourselves want to be doing that too. And I think the more companies that succeed, more companies that can be seen to succeed in that space will generate greater appetite and greater interest in that bit of the market. So I think there is, again, it's one of those things that I think will be on the rise, but might take a little bit of time to get there, to build that confidence. NHS is notoriously difficult to deal with. I think in the short term, there's something about asking the right question of your audience. I mean, when we at Public started thinking about what is it that we're encouraging companies to do, a lot of the companies that we speak to haven't necessarily identified themselves as gov tech. They have a technology that can be applied to the private sector or can be applied to the public sector, and really it's about unlocking their interest, if you like, by asking the question of, do you want to transform public services? Can you use your technology to do this, to provide a better service to citizens? And that's what hooked them in, rather than saying, are you asking them a kind of a more neat boxed question. I don't know if that would help for you to think about how you can unpack that a bit.
I think from kind of our perspective as well, we've got certain things that we'll be working on that won't be revenue generative tomorrow. but that's not the point. The point is that actually it's going to be revenue generative maybe in 5-10 years time. So maybe perhaps it's also your audience as well. If you're, say, trying to do robotics in the NHS, find someone who doesn't want to build a robotics division today but wants one in 5 years time, and actually will be the person who sort of sits there with you and says, look, you've now got 5 years to build this, let's nurture you, let's develop you, let's kind of build it up to there. But that depends on what it is you're doing, and then kind of finding that right fit as well.
But that is a very, very tricky question, building momentum around these things. Okay, we are approaching the end, so we have one final question there, and then Chris, you wanted to show the results, right? And then we can continue conversations outside this room where we will have drinks and stuff, so it doesn't end here. So
I do think that the innovation ecosystem is extremely important, which is one reason why I want to come here. But what I haven't heard is like, how do we create that ecosystem, or what is being done to generate that ecosystem? Do we have enough people in the same area that just bumps to each other, talks to each other, or how can people start talking about things? And a lot of times when I speak with entrepreneurs that are working on something, their biggest goal is to be sold to a large company in the US. Their biggest goal is not just to get it out there, not to be successful, but the concept of success is to sell out, which is self-defeating in the purpose. Because what needs to happen is the successful entrepreneurs need to come back and invest in this neighborhood, and that's the way this can become similar to Silicon Valley.
So what is being done here? So just a brief notion, actually this building is part of what is being done here. So London, the center of gravity for entrepreneurship in London traditionally has been more to the east. And it's a huge development project around here where some of that gravity, Imperial is trying to shift some of that gravity to this area. And a lot of things are being done around here. Anything
I was
come
just
to
going to
mind?
say that I think it's probably, there's no silver bullet answer, but it starts at lots of different stages, and you could go really far back and say in schools we should start talking about the idea of entrepreneurship and starting businesses way sooner. When you get to universities, creating the environments and making it a viable career path for people to try starting something without having to shut the door on academia, and then beyond, and at the corporate stage, like opening up doors and engaging with startups more. So I think there's like there's definitely a pipeline where at every single stage someone can do something, some organisation can do something, and to someone's point earlier, I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, but that's a great question to end the discussion. What makes an ecosystem? And I think here we have your opinions, and we can see that it's a mix of many things. So we have, what do we have? Which ecosystem partners currently try the greatest value to fledgling startups? And 39% say that it's investors, 10% say it's large corporates, medium-sized businesses 6%, other startups 20%, universities 16%, and government initiatives 9%. So it's really a mix of many things. How to put it all together such that the region starts to thrive is a tricky question, but I think we are probably in for a good start with this building and some of the other developments in this area. So I think that concludes the question and answer session, and we have drinks and we have some snacks outside where we can continue our conversations. Thank you to all the panelists.
Huge thank you to South Berkeley, and yeah, please make your way outside for snacks and drinks as well.